Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast, and I have a great guest for you today. His name is Bob Takacs, and he is the Research Director and SMB IT Practice Leader at Analysys Mason, which is an analyst research firm. Now, they've recently published a technology forecast report that predicts that despite a challenging market and, let's face it, a tumultuous geopolitical landscape right now, SMB IT spend is set to reach $1.4 trillion over the next 5 years. And they also predict that SMBs will grow at a rate of 7.5% between 2022 and 2027, and cloud-based categories are expected to grow from $600 billion this year in 2022 to $1 trillion in 2027. So I want to find out more about these stats, what's driving the growth, and much more. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to New York, where you can sit down with me and Bob Takacs. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, well, thanks, Neil, and thank you for having me. I'm Bob Takacs. I lead the SMB practice for Analysys Mason. Analysys Mason is a global ICT consulting firm headquartered in London. The team that I lead is in New York. And what we do is we work with many of the leading vendors and operators to help them gain insights to the SMB ecosystem. We define SMB, small business, 1 to 99 employees, medium business, 100 to 999 employees. And we have a number of research assets and tools to help our clients better understand the marketplace, how to better position their products, educate their channels, and identify high-value targets.
You've had an incredibly successful career, but a tradition we have on the podcast, I always like to take my guests back in time for a moment. So can you remember where your passion for technology came from, or just a moment that maybe put you on the path that you're on today?
Yeah, and I think looking back, and I think certainly, having worked in the consultancy environment for, I guess, over 20 years now, being part of the IT, the internet boom, at that point, and working with clients who are really changing the way we work and live, I think was exciting for me. And being part of that and being able to advise clients in the tech space, I think was always exciting for me, and that's kind of a thread that I've had for the 20 years plus that I've been doing this.
And of course, it would be that path that would lead you to Analysys Mason, which is a leading analyst research firm. But I am conscious there will be people listening all over the world, some of which will be hearing about you for the first time. So you can tell me more about the company and what possibly makes you a little bit different or unique from other firms out there.
Sure. No, that's a good point, Neil. And I think, looking at us, I think certainly we have 30 years experience in advising, and being leaders in the ICT space, and certainly having a depth of knowledge in the telco world. And the team that I lead in New York is focused on SMB, and we've been doing this now for over 25 years. And the SMB practice is as a result of an acquisition Analysys Mason did a few years ago of a firm called AMI Partners. And AMI Partners has been kind of a leader in SMB tracking this space, like I said, for over 2 decades. So I think it's really our focus. It's really about the knowledge that we bring within this space. I think really separates us, and just the depth, the footprint that we have globally, allows us to draw on, many different resources to provide a lot of fact-based insights.
And one of the things that put you guys on my radar was that you recently published a technology forecast report that predicted that despite a challenging market and geopolitical landscape, SMB IT spend is set to reach an incredible $1.4 trillion over the next 5 years. Can you tell me a little bit more about the report and who you surveyed?
Sure. And yeah, that's one of our leading products, our flagship product, called the SMB Tech Forecaster. And again, this is a tool that we developed over the last 20 years where we track spending across 130 ICT categories across 52 countries. And we have a number of lenses that we could apply on that. So we could look at it by employee bands, verticals, channels. And yeah, what we predicted is that even though the events, let's say from March to now, have changed, globally, and I think for some of the macroeconomic headwinds we see, SMBs by and large, coming out of the pandemic are going to continue to spend, and they're going to spend on, we say that SMBs are getting back to business, so they're spending on solutions that they did probably pre-pandemic, and that's all about being solutions that drive resiliency, drive growth, are certainly categories that SMBs are going to be focused on right now. And I think underpinning this, Neil, is really the work from home environment that's going to continue to play a part. At least in our latest research, we see that work from home will be continuing for at least the next 12 to 18 months, and this has caused a lot of changes in behavior from the SMBs, and that also creates opportunities for the vendors, because now SMBs are faced with this distributed workforce. They have needs now to manage this workforce, and the pandemic has really accelerated a lot of the need for SMBs to look for more of a remote managed service type of solution. So I guess to boil it down, yes, a lot of spending will be continued. We see growth over the next several years, with the cloud being the big, really driving a lot of that growth is going to come from cloud-based solutions.
And I dropped a pretty big stat from the report a few moments ago there. IT spend to reach $1.4 trillion over the next 5 years. And the report also predicts SMBs will grow at a rate of 7.5% between 2022 and 2027. And in addition, cloud-based strategies are also expected to grow from $600 billion in 2022 to $1 trillion in 2027. So I've got to ask, what's driving this growth? Because I think we're all in so much bad news at the moment. It's almost refreshing to hear some positive news like this.
Yeah, and I think what we see is, the SMBs by and large are kind of sold on the cloud and sold on digital transformation, and I think they're getting back to investing in solutions that could help, like I mentioned earlier, help drive growth. So we do see spending continue, but we do say there's a little caution here. That this spending will continue, but there's probably just a little bit of a caution. In terms of the sales cycles now have become maybe a little bit longer, but fundamentally, there will be continued spend. Now, having said that, where are they spending their dollars? I think it's three categories really consist of about half of that cloud spend, and that's managed services, infrastructure, and cybersecurity. So those three really make up a bulk of the spend, and again, underpinning that is a lot of the work from home and distributed workforce is driving that and underpinning that spend.
And if we were to drill down a little further there, you mentioned the three categories that account for almost half of the spending. Is there anything you can expand on, or any insights or anything around those three categories that you're noticing?
Yeah, and I think again, those three really drive the point about resiliency, and really, I think that's certainly a big focus that SMBs have. Resiliency and continuity, and what we would say is, from a messaging perspective, what we've seen is SMBs really want to be treated almost what we say as an enterprise light type of relationship. And, what that means is, they expect more of a consultative type of approach. And for vendors, it's important when you're reaching out to SMBs to frame the messaging within more of a business type of solution. So they want to know it's not just selling the technology, but tell me why this technology, how this technology is going to help me gain more customers, how it's going to protect me against attacks, how it's going to help me connect my employees together. And I think that kind of shift in behavior we saw by a lot of the SMBs that we interviewed, that they really aren't looking for a break fix type of or transactional solution, but they really want that more, what we coined as an enterprise light type of relationship. So I think that's certainly a takeaway that we've seen. But when we look at it from a spending perspective, managed services and becomes a really important growth category because the SMBs we interviewed, from a priority perspective, their top two priorities, IT priorities, is about really having the ability to manage their networks remotely. So it becomes important. Managed services become an important part of that.
And you mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation that we can expect hybrid working, remote working, etc., to continue for at least another 12 to 18 months, possibly longer. So I'm curious, with businesses knowing this, do you think the distributed workforce and hybrid working practices are playing a big part in influencing that increased IT spending?
I think they are. And again, what that remote, work places, whether it's a couple of days going in the office, few days at home, but I think what we saw in the beginning of the pandemic, all the vulnerabilities, into the network, employees using their personal laptops for work, and how does that, what security issues, did that cause for a lot of companies. So hence, cybersecurity was certainly a big priority. Continues to be a significant spending priority, but certainly during the pandemic it was big. The collaboration tools certainly during the pandemic we saw significant increases in spending on collaboration tools. We still see that going forward, but a lot of the investments have been made, and what we see now, like I mentioned, it's about that resiliency. It's about staying connected and supporting this work from home environment. So infrastructure, cybersecurity, again, are going to be important priorities and investments where SMBs are going to make.
And I'm conscious that you live and breathe this space. You know the industry inside out. You've probably seen it all over the years and then some more on top of that. So did anything in this report surprise you at all?
Yeah, that's a good point. And looking back at many of the studies that we've conducted over the years, I think, when we looked at managed services, for example, typically it was the higher end SB and certainly MBs that were investing in those type of solutions. And I think what was really interesting, what we saw is, even the smaller SBs now are investing in those type of solutions, which we saw, which was quite interesting. So even below the 99 employee bucket, below the 50 bucket, for example, we saw significant investments in managed services. So that's something that is kind of was unique. And I think as a result of the pandemic, I think the second point is just this shift in behavior in the way SMBs now want that relationship. That they are expecting a bit more in their relationship from their partners and from their vendors in terms of, being able to speak to me in more of a business orientation. And I think that was kind of a shift that we saw. We expected on the MB side and certainly on the enterprise side, but even smaller SBs now are looking for that type of. So I think that the point being is the behaviors, the change in behavior was pretty significant, let's say over the last 2 years, 2.5 years or so, as a result of the pandemic.
And for any business leaders listening or decision makers listening, what should they be doing with these insights so they can be better prepared for the road ahead and have a more proactive than reactive mindset?
Yeah, and I think clearly a couple of things. One is just from a category perspective. So we see where the where the priorities are. So clearly, in these three categories, as I mentioned, that's where half of the spend is coming from. So, again, if if they're going to be new product launches or those categories are going to drive a significant part of the growth. So I think from a solution category priority, those three are going to be top. That said, I think the broader narrative is what what I mentioned earlier is the point that executives in the vendor space should consider messaging to SMBs in this business orientation. I think that's kind of universal what we've seen in our studies. So I think that's not only messaging from the vendor perspective, but also it's important to tell your channel partners to do that as well, to educate the channels to speak in that business orientation. I think that's kind of probably two big points to demonstrate that thought leadership, business orientation. I think there's a big appetite for that.
100% with you on that, and we'll get to the report in a minute and where people can find that online. But before I let you go, we began the podcast talking about your origin story, and as we've almost come full circle now, I'm going to ask you, can you share the funniest or most interesting story that has happened in your career if you sit back and reflect there?
There are a few, but I think I'd like to pick up what you say on kind of the full circle, and on that point. I would just, say that being at Analysys Mason. So it's funny how they do say life goes full circle. And I actually worked for AMI Partners back in the mid 2000s. So I spent a few years there, and I left in 2008, and networked a bit. And then back in 2018 or 2019, I had conversations with some of the folks here at Analysys Mason about potentially rejoining, and here, some what is it, 14 years later, kind of life goes full circle. The thing that's really nice is some of my team members that I worked with back in the mid 2000s. A few of them are still here, so it did go full circle. Obviously, there's a lot of new people, but there's still some that I work with. Back when I was here in 2005. So that point about life does go full circle. That certainly, it applied to my career as well.
Yeah, that's something I see all the time as well. I'm completely with you on that. And for anyone listening that would like to find out more information about Analysys Mason or dig a little bit deeper on that report that we've discussed today, what's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, we have it up on our website, so analysysmason.com. It's there. Certainly you could reach out to me, Bob Takacs, at analysysmason.com. But the report is on our website, and we'd love to have a deeper conversation with any of your listeners on how the report could impact their strategy. So we'd be happy to do that.
Well, the big takeaway for me from the report was SMBs spending priorities include IT solutions that all support things that have impacted everybody over the last 2 years, 2 to 3 years even. Support efficiency, resiliency, business continuity. I think these are all top of mind for everyone. But more than anything, just a big thank you for coming on, not just for sharing the insights from that report, but your origin story too, and how it all ends up full circle in the end. So big thank you for sharing that with me today.
Well, Neil, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and thank you again for your time.
Today's podcast sponsor is Nextiva. Nextiva takes the hassle out of communicating with customers and your team. If you need to send a text, Nextiva One can do that. Need to send an important email? Nextiva One does that too. Need to start an internal chat with your meetings and phone calls? Yep, you got it. It's built right into Nextiva One. But the real game changer here is what Nextiva calls threaded conversations. Threaded conversations let you see an entire call and messaging history regardless of the tool that you use to communicate. So go to nextiva.com/techtalkdaily and you can start experiencing the simplicity that Nextiva One could bring to your business. So many big takeaways from that report, such as SMBs spending priorities, include things like IT solutions that support things like efficiency, resiliency, business continuity, all those things that we've been struggling with over the last 3 years, or certainly been made more aware of. And the three categories that account for almost half of the spending there are managed services, infrastructure, cybersecurity. Maybe not too many surprises there, especially when you throw in how distributed workforces and hybrid working practices are continuing to influence IT spending. But this was one report and a conversation between two people here, one in the UK and one in the US. But I appreciate you are all listening in over 165 different countries. We have over 100,000 of you now listening each month. So I want to know your thoughts, your experiences, your insights. What spending initiatives are you seeing? What concerns you, what doesn't, whatever it is, any questions, or you want to come on the podcast, simply email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. If you want to work with me, my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. If you want to slide into the DMs, we can do that too. Just look for Neil C. Hughes on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all the usual suspect. I'm nice and easy to find. So a big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.